MMOs were once the most talked about games on the market. These gigantic titles threw you into a blank canvas, often with no climactic story or clear end. And that was okay, because you started from nothing. Level 1, expected to venture forth into an unknown world, killing bad guys until you get shiny armor and glowy weapons. Sure, you had to dedicate a boatload of your time to them, and money of course, but in exchange, you got a whole lot of game. In the early 2000s, the MMO seemed to be the natural direction for gaming, as Everquest and World of Warcraft would be able to take RPGs to the next level. It was no longer roleplay with a board, your imagination, or through text boxes. It was role-playing through a fully realized 3D world with complicated systems and mechanics. These detailed worlds were huge, and immediately dwarfed the scale of other popular games on the market, even for the foreseeable future. Games like Grand Theft Auto, Halo 2, and even The Elder Scrolls Oblivion, they seemed tiny in comparison. Placing the camera behind the shoulder of the character made sure that we got in on that action, so we could see those pretty new graphics just a little bit better, which were often obscured with an isometric camera, like many sandbox or D&D inspired RPGs that had come before. This new presentation allowed players to get lost in an RPG without sacrificing the trimmings of a modern game. And you know what? People loved them. Eventually, MMOs would become so demanded that the pioneers would be copied left, right, and center many times over. Games like The Old Republic, Rift, and more would piggyback off the initial MMO boom, and many more would follow. During these years, everywhere you turned, a new MMO would pop up. Some were okay, some were straight bad, and some failed because they were just too ambitious, like The Secret World. Eventually, the MMO market settled into what people call niches. World of Warcraft dominated the casual market. EVE Online was for the space junkie simulation fan. Everquest and RuneScape was for the old-timers. Lord of the Rings Online was for fantasy fiction, and a handful of others with dedicated fan bases still existed like Guild Wars. Either way, they were all trying to grab a piece of the pie, yet most were never able to overcome player attachment issues. You see, MMOs were demanding and full of addictive gameplay loops and gear hunting, sucking in adventurers to spend months or even years inside a single world. They were costly too. Remember, most MMOs back in the day not only had a subscription charge, but had a price tag of $60 as well. So most players stuck to one game, otherwise they'd lose out on the progress and cash they had dumped into a game. It's not unlike playing a MOBA today, for example. You wouldn't want to switch games after acquiring all the heroes. So really, the biggest of the big flourished, while new arrivals slowly drifted away into oblivion. However, even the most successful MMORPGs were not immune to time. Years down the road, the MMORPGs seemed to die down. It's anyone's guess why many popular MMOs began to decline. Maybe it was because people simply ran out of things to do, or got bored when the allure of the MMO began to wear off. Perhaps it was because tastes were changing towards more immediate gratification. Or maybe because some big MMOs tried to modernize their offerings, such as World of Warcraft's transformation through the years. Either way, the MMORPG was slowly fading away, populations were down, and many companies stopped reporting player counts to the public, which is never a good sign. Did the MMORPG simply have its time in the spotlight and then fade away? Did gamers truly not want what they stood for anymore? It seemed like the industry had more or less moved on. But not even a year or two later, after that question was being plastered all over the interwebs, things seem to be changing. If not changing, at least the gears are starting to turn. Are MMOs making a comeback already? Well, a few indicators may indicate a possibility. For one, the incredible success of Final Fantasy XIV proves that old-school MMORPGs are still well in demand. Final Fantasy XIV is essentially a classic MMO-style game with hotkey-based abilities and traditional classes, obviously coded in the magical universe of, well, Final Fantasy. I think it's a really solid game, and it's been estimated that active populations still number upwards of over 300,000 on a daily basis across all platforms. And given the generous influx of new content at a price, the game still feels relevant after all these years and its initial re-release of A Realm Reborn. And two, World of Warcraft Classic, a concept that seemed to be a mathematical impossibility to any hardcore fan, was announced and is releasing in August of 2019. Classic WoW marks the first time I have ever seen an MMO bring back old versions of itself to exclusive servers, completely separate from the main game, albeit under the same subscription service and of course cost. Considering retail WoW has departed so far away from vanilla, its resurgence 15 years later actually marks a huge telling point of whether old school MMOs can thrive in today's gaming economy. Many say that it's simply nostalgia, but I think it goes way beyond that. Every player has a preferred way to be a part of an MMORPG, and sometimes that's how the game was a long time ago, even if it takes us losing the way we played those games to realize that we want them back. And I think that's the idealism that sums up World of Warcraft Classic and its possible resurgence into the market very shortly. Lastly, The Elder Scrolls Online is another big indicator, a hybrid perspective MMO that's doing quite well with consistent updates and big expansion packs. Like Final Fantasy though, much of the allure of ESO is tied to its brand, which begs the question, is the game good on its own? Again, it doesn't really matter my personal preference here. If the game can justify continued development and satisfy players who would say yes, then there's a space for it somewhere. It's unclear if game genres have a window where they can enjoy their time in the sun, yet eventually that sun will set. Some would like to think so, as you can only iterate so much without losing out on the core fundamentals of those concepts. Taking it too far alienates fans, while not pushing it far enough can lead to it becoming stale. Ultimately, I think genres don't die out completely, they just become dormant. They'll do well for a while, but then other exciting games come into the scene, maybe coinciding with the release of a new console or piece of hardware like VR. And for a while, those concepts will enjoy their time in the sun, until again, people start to crave something else or they realize it was just a fad in the first place. Have this happen multiple times over a decade, and perhaps people will want to dig up old styles of gaming that they realize that they now miss. It's nothing new to science, it's called that people have an attention span. They say that history has a way of repeating itself. By that logic, we can look at game fads or game genres as one big seesaw where trends come, go, and then possibly come back again. Arcade racing games, platformers, survival games, BR, and even maybe the MMORPG. They'll be the most popular kid at school one day, lose their glimmer the next, yet maybe, just maybe, resurface later on.